Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a bit about Giannis Antetokounmpo. Of course, he's having a phenomenal season, honestly one of the best of his career, and I don't think that surprises anybody. I think if I just say the name Giannis, you probably assume he's having like an MVP caliber season, which he is. He's the best player in the world in my opinion, and he's on pace to be one of the greatest players of all time. In fact, he's probably already there. I made a full video this past offseason talking about how Giannis might have a GOAT case by the end of his career, so if you want to go check that out, I'll try and make sure to link it in the description, although I forget more often than I remember to do things like that when I mention them. And of course, it's not exactly a hot take to say he's the best player in the world and one of the greatest players of all time. I mean, he's a two-time MVP, a DPOY, an NBA champion. He's a finals MVP in a series where in the closeout game, he dropped 50 points, one of the best individual finals performances of all time. Yet, it kind of feels like at this point, Giannis has almost become a bit underrated and forgotten by NBA fans, which I know might sound kind of crazy because of all the things I just mentioned, but despite all these great things that Giannis has done and all the things that he continues to do this season, I almost feel like I don't really hear about him that much. Like, I'll see some highlight clips on Twitter or YouTube and things like that when he has great games. I'll see those big NBA like media accounts tweet about his stats from a game or his stats over the past 10 games, but in terms of just general NBA discourse, I feel like Giannis's name very rarely comes up, or at least not nearly as much as it probably should. Now, maybe I'm just not looking in the right places. Maybe I need to go out and follow more Bucks accounts. Maybe I'm not following enough of the big NBA pages that actually post about Giannis a little bit more than like, here's some of his stats, here's some of his highlights. Maybe I'm part of the problem because I don't tweet about Giannis enough. Who really knows? But I also noticed, like, in the national media outlets where most NBA fans, especially the more casual NBA fans, get kind of their takes, get their opinions, or just get their NBA news, they learn a lot about the game through those national media broadcasts. Giannis isn't covered that much, or at least not nearly as much as some other stars, or as much as maybe he should, which is a bit of a problem. And so that's part of why I'm making this video, because I feel like people are forgetting about Giannis. Casual fans are forgetting about how great he is, and even the most hardcore NBA fans have come to a point where we've almost been normalized to what Giannis does, and I don't think that should be the case. Especially when we take a look at what Giannis has been doing over the course of this year, and recently in particular. On the season, Giannis is averaging 32.4 points per game, the highest of his career, 12.3 rebounds per game, leading the league in that category, and 5.4 assists. It's just an unbelievable stat line, although I will say it's not exactly surprising when I take a look at the player that Giannis is. If you gave me this stat line and said somebody in the league is averaging these stats right now, who is it? I would guess Giannis 30 times out of 10. Like, there would never be a player that would cross my mind other than Giannis when I take a look at these stats. And I think that speaks to his greatness, how special of a player he is, that just, you can take a look at a crazy, unbelievable stat line like this and say, yeah, that is Giannis, the best player in the world right now. But this recent stretch that the Bucks and Giannis are on is in particular really interesting, because right now the Bucks are on a 10-game win streak, which I feel like a lot of people don't realize. I watch, of course, a lot of Bucks games. I watch Giannis, but until a few days ago, I really didn't register, oh my gosh, they're on like a 6-game, a 7-game, and eventually now a 10-game win streak. So I'm sure a lot of you out there probably also did not realize that. And over this stretch, Giannis has been unbelievable. He's putting up 37.3 points per game, 13.5 rebounds, and 5.5 assists, with a true shooting percentage of 64.4%, which is well above league average. He's shooting like 37% from downtown over those games. Of course, he's dominating inside as well. He's doing all the things you typically would expect from Giannis, just even more than usual. This stretch also includes a 50-point game against the Pelicans, in which he had 50 in just 30 minutes on 77% shooting, which really should not be possible, and one against the Clippers where he had 54 points and 19 rebounds, probably one of the best regular season games he's ever had. He's had 3 50-plus point games in total over the course of the season, all of which have happened since the calendar turned to 2023. And these are all ridiculous numbers, like absolutely absurd, even in a season where it feels like stats are crazier than ever. We're seeing so many guys average 30 points per game, triple doubles, crazy rebound totals, assists, young players doing things that we wouldn't expect. Offenses are going crazy. The numbers feel juiced, yet somehow Giannis stand out amongst the crowd. So we're seeing one of the most unstoppable and dominant forces in NBA history, having one of the greatest seasons he's ever had, while his team is on the verge of competing for another championship and potentially the top seed in the Eastern Conference. But we're not hearing about him nearly as much as we should. I, once again, feel like I don't hear him talked about as much as some of the other MVP candidates, like a Joel Embiid, a Nikola Jokic, a Jason Tatum, a Luka Doncic, amongst some of the other stars in the league. And I'm not saying that those guys don't deserve that attention, because they 100% do. There are so many great players in the league. I also just feel like Giannis should get covered a bit more. My main theory for this is that we've just become normalized to what Giannis does. His greatness feels almost ordinary to us, which is completely absurd when you think about it, but it's a phenomenon we've seen again and again. And with Giannis in particular, it feels like ever since he was crowned by most people as the best player in the world, I know for me this was the case after his 2021 Finals MVP, that huge closeout game, I was like, okay, this guy is the best player in the world. It feels like he's been kind of forgotten by NBA fans, and in particular in terms of awards. Now this could also be in the awards case, partially because of voter fatigue, which is a real thing in the NBA. Although I will say Jokic is right now potentially on the verge of three-peating, so maybe that is a phenomenon that is dying away, which would be great for the game, but that is something that I did want to note. But I also, once again, think it's because he has that best player in the world title, weirdly enough. I've kind of got this theory that when a player is crowned by most people as the best player in the world, they almost lose a little bit of traction with voters, which doesn't sound right. It sounds like if a player is widely considered the best in the world, then voters would look at them and say, okay, this guy deserves this award or that award because of what he's doing. But somehow I feel like it's kind of the opposite. And I go back usually to LeBron James. LeBron, over the course of his career, has been the best player in the world for a majority of the time that he's played. Some people argue that. I'm not going to argue that. I really think LeBron has been the best player in the world for a very long time, up until Giannis took the crown in like 2021. But he only has 4 MVPs, and he also has missed out on numerous other awards. Like, he didn't win that Defensive Player of the Year that he probably should have gotten. He probably should have gotten more consideration, even if he actually didn't win 4 MVP awards. Overall, it just feels like LeBron deserved more love from voters. But it didn't happen, and part of me thinks it's because he was the best player in the world. It's almost as if being considered the #1 player right now ends up costing you award points down the line, because it, like I said, acts almost as if an award in itself. Now, I don't know if that's an actual factual thing, but to me it kind of makes sense, and it's a theory that now I've continued to run with, and maybe I'll make a full video about that, but I do think it's really interesting. But of course, I'm also just referring to overall NBA discourse as a whole, whether it's NBA Twitter, those national media talking heads that we discussed earlier, or anything in between. Giannis just doesn't quite get the love that he should, because I believe we've been normalized to what he does on a nightly basis. Giannis can go out and have a 50-piece. He can have a 45-point, 15-rebound game, a 30-point triple-double with 5 blocks, whatever, and people are going to talk about it for a little bit, but by the next day, it's basically done for. People aren't discussing it. And I think that does speak once again to just how good Giannis is. The fact that he can have these ridiculous, once almost unheard of stat lines almost every single night, but people aren't going to talk about it for very long. And I also think that's partially because when we go back to that best player in the world title, the NBA, of course, is driven by narratives. That is the case. I mean, I cover a ton of narratives on this channel, and I think it's fun to think about the storylines. But with Giannis, like I said, most people consider him the best player in the world. So when he has like a 50-piece, there's not really a talking point of, oh, does this make Giannis the best in the world? How does this change his legacy and everything? Because he's already solidified as one of the best players of all time. And he's done so much that one random 50-piece doesn't push him up very more. And there's nobody really for him to pass. I think you can argue that there are better players in the world. I think it's up to your opinion. But in my opinion, it is very clearly him. And I think that having that title almost amongst most people makes it really hard to talk about these narratives or talk about these storylines when he has these big games. So I think that's also partially it. But I do think the majority is just the normalization of what he's doing on a nightly basis. And I don't think that should be the case. We've seen that, like I said, I mentioned with LeBron James. I think that happened for a while. Russell Westbrook, I think, is a great example with the triple-double. What he did in that MVP season was unheard of. And now triple-doubles are happening a lot more often, and people go back, revisionist history and say that, oh, that wasn't that impressive. Who cares that he shattered a record that was seen as basically unbeatable and had one of the greatest individual seasons we've seen in a very long time? Well, to answer the question, I do, and I don't think it's fair to go back and revise that history just because we've now become normalized to what he's doing. Same thing with Giannis. What he's doing right now should not be something that we see on a night in, night out basis, but because he's one of those all-time talents, it is. I also think this is kind of the case with Milwaukee as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, they're 1 game back of the 1 seed behind Boston. They've won 10 in a row. They're a top 10 offense and the 2nd best defense over these games. Chris Middleton's starting to look more like himself. Drew Holiday, of course, made the All-Star game. Brook Lopez has been a Defensive Player of the Year candidate most of the season. Bobby Portis has been great. Some of their other shooters are starting to turn their seasons around. They just added Jay Crowder, who's a really solid 3-and-D wing that gives them some depth. And they could also take a look at some guys on the buyout market. There are some really solid backup point guards that they could put behind Drew, like a Russell Westbrook. I think a Reggie Jackson could be okay in their system too, as amongst some other guys. So there's plenty of room for improvement still with Milwaukee, in addition to the fact that they've very rarely been healthy over the course of this season. And now recently, we're starting to see what they could potentially do when they do get back to full health, which is win an NBA title. And I don't think they're talked about nearly enough either as NBA championship contenders. Of course, I think most people know that the Bucks are for real, but I feel like when we talk about the favorites or teams that we could see lifting Larry O'Brien at the end of things, the Bucks should be discussed a lot more. So basically, the point of this video is don't forget about Giannis. Don't overlook what he's doing on a nightly basis. basis because it's not something we really ever see. Of course, you're going to see these amazing players come and go every so often, but Giannis is one of those special guys that is going to go down as probably a top 10 player of all time when it's said and done. I think if he continues to rack up championships, MVPs, and Defensive Player of the Years over the course of his career, which still has a long way to go, he could be considered one of the top 5 players of all time, or like one of the GOATs of this era, pretty much, when you really take an in-depth look at his career and where it could potentially go. Of course, this is all also just projection here, but in terms of what he's doing right now on the court, it's greatness personified. It is things that we hardly ever see in NBA history, so don't take them for granted. Don't take the Bucks for granted either, because what they're doing right now is something that should be talked about a lot. And yeah, basically, don't forget about Giannis Antetokounmpo and the greatness that he is displaying. With all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Also, comment down below, let me know where you think Giannis ends up in his career. How many titles does he win? How many MVPs, Defensive Player of the Years, and everything in between? Where does he finish all time? And do you agree with me that Giannis is the best player in the world? I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.